Prime Minister's office. Throughout the period of more than 90 consecutive months, his responsibilities included writing foreign policy speeches for Mr. Abe. After spending 20 years with the Nikki Business, a weekly magazine, he joined the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in 2005 as Deputy Press Secretary and Deputy Director General for Public Diplomacy. Until he left the ministry 3 years later, he addressed the English-speaking press and wrote speeches for then Foreign Minister Taro Aso and other leaders, including then Prime Minister Abe. While with the magazine, he spent a stint in London from 1997 to 2000 as the magazine correspondent. In 1999, the Foreign Press Association in London elected him president, the first from the east of Suez. During his journalistic career, he spent sabbaticals at Woodrow Wilson School, Princeton University, as a Fulbright visiting fellow, at the Shanghai Institute for International Studies, and at the Brookings Institution as a paid CNAPS fellow. For 5 years till 2013, he was executive advisor to the then chairman of the Central Japan Railway Company, Kasai Yoshiyuki, while holding visiting professorship at Kyoto University and Meiji University School of Global Japanese Studies, LLB from the University of Tokyo, doctorate in National Security from Takusoku University. He has authored or co-authored more than 10 books on international affairs. One of his latest books, entitled, if put into English, Truth Be Told of Abe Shinzo, was his own account of Abe's leadership. He has appeared live numerous times on BBC, Al Jazeera, CNN, CNA, TRT, etc. Now we have Professor Aswini K. Mohapatra, sir. Professor Aswini K. Mohapatra, who is the distinguished chair to this international webinar, is a dean of the School of International Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. He is also a professor at the Center for West Asian Studies, School of International Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru University. Professor Mohapatra has been a visiting professor at the Chao University, Tokyo, in June 2009. He has also been an European Union visitor to Brussels in September 2009. In 2008, he was a visiting fellow at Maison des Sciences de Homme, Paris. In May 1999, he participated in the 1999 Conflict Resolution Program in Uppsala University, Sweden. In November 1996, he participated in the International Civilian Peacekeeping and Peace Building Training Program at the Austrian Peace Research Center, Austria. In August 1996, he attended the Conflict Resolution course at the Peace Research Institute, Oslo, Norway. Professor Mohapatra, sir, had also the privilege of being the state guest of the Republic of Cyprus in December 1996. May I now request to our head of the institution, Dr. Ramesh Kar, Vice Principal, sir, to deliver a formal welcome address. So, sir, now it's over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Sharma. Good evening, everyone. Respected distinguished research persons, honorable dignitaries, dear colleagues, research scholars, conveners, coordinators, IQC coordinators, NET coordinators, HOD of the Department of Political Science, and professional students. It is really a great pleasure and privilege to be present in the international webinars organized by the students and teachers of the Department of Political Science in collaboration with IQAC. Being the head of the institute, I must congratulate the students and teachers of the Department of Political Science, especially the HOD professors, Devdas De, and conveners, Prasanth Kumar Sharma, as they have taken initiative to organize the international webinar. Being the head of the institute, I must congratulate the distinguished research person, Professor Aswini Kumar Mohapatra, Dean School of International Studies, JNU, New Delhi, India, and Professor Tomohiko Taniguchi, Special Advisor to former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, Japan. I am immensely grateful as they have responded to our invitation despite their busy schedule. I do hope that our participant would sound her best from this discussion. I also convey my best wishes to our governing body, all members, for moral support to organize the international webinars. I firmly believe that the day's webinars will be interesting and interactive one. The survey of the day's speech and reciprocal discussion, I do hope that would further illumine the minds of the teachers and taught. I wish warm success of the webinars. Once again, thanking you all.
Thank you very much, sir, for your welcome address. May I now request to Professor Aswini K. Mohapatra, sir, to kindly chair the session. Sir, now it's over to you.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Prashant Kumar Sharma, the coordinator of this webinar, where you have invited extremely important person, distinguished scholar, a foreign policy practitioner from Japan. He's a well-known personality. We're quite familiar with his face, with his write-up. Is Professor Tomohiko. And I'm also extremely thankful to your colleagues, particularly Mr. Debadas Day, head of the department, and all your colleagues for having taken the initiative to understand the extremely contemporary and topical issue related to Quad. Because the Quad, ever since it was formally launched in 12th March 2021, this year. So, we don't have much confusion in India, particularly in Indian security community, but definitely it has created confusion all around, particularly in the neighborhood, also to an extent in the Pacific region. So very briefly, let me give the broad outline of the Quad, the quadrilateral framework, which was earlier called the quadrilateral dialogue, which was floated way back in 2004, not as a dialogue, but as a kind of a group of four comprising four powerful, influential global actors: Japan, India, United States of America, and Australia. Initially, it was called a kind of tsunami core group. But then, due to certain circumstances, there is eclipse of this group until 2007. And much of the credit for the revival of this group, or the dialogue framework, whatever you call it, it goes to Japan. And again, extremely, I simply will not mind mentioning my words that way by saying categorically the credit goes the former Prime Minister of Japan, Mr. Abe. And he was the one who always took the lead ever since his re-election, I believe 2016 as the Prime Minister, and in the wake of the dispute they had in 2013 with China. So you have this evolution of group from a kind of a context-specific to a kind of geo-strategic, geo-economic entity. I think none of these kind of incidents ever happened before in the history of the world since the end of World War II. Then when it comes to its goal and objectives, which is categorically stated first in the joint article published in newspaper in the Indian leading dailies, and subsequently joint statement issued by all the four dignitaries, the head of the state, which said a free, inclusive, prosperous region based on our democratic values, unconstrained by passion or fear. So it is in a way, if you look at it, it looks to an extent complex. It is an entity which represents multiple layers of interest, aspects. It's not simply focused on geostrategic or security, but nevertheless, implicit in this entire group is a shared concern in Indo-Pacific region and beyond. Even if the source of the concern has been identified, the name of the country has not been explicitly or manifestly mentioned in the joint statement. But the critics, particularly our neighbor, Prime Minister, headline-grabbing idea which will dissipate like the it is not a edifice, a strong edifice, and a concrete revolution, and it means many things to many people, both the critics and the different aspects of the particular process. I think none other than Professor Tomohiko. I think he's the best person to do justice to this particular topic because of the engagement, his personal engagement as the advisor to the former Prime Minister Abe when this whole idea took off, and his close association of the foreign policy making elite of his country.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Professor Mohapatra. It's a great pleasure for me to speak with you all. Quite a few people, 72 at the moment. And good evening to you. I am speaking from my home in Tokyo. I left Japanese government service, as was introduced by Professor Sharma, 16th September last year, exactly the same day when Japanese Prime Minister Abe, Shinzo Abe, stepped down as premier. He's done a lot of things, both domestically and internationally. And one of the accomplishments, of course, is to launch this concept and framework of Quad. Today, I am going to use a PowerPoint slide presentation, and that's not going to be so much a long one. And it's going to be just 16 pages long. And may I ask Professor Sharma to share the screen with other members?
Yes, sir, sure. Professor Khalik, sir.
Right. The slide begins by showing you the next map. Page 2, please. Next page. Yes. This is not something uniquely new. It's been known to many for years. It shows the radius, the range with which China's conventional strike capabilities cover on the continent and beyond. Needless to say, Japan and India are as close to China. If you look at this map, it's been well covered by some of the ballistic missiles that China possesses. So this is about conventional strike capabilities. More worrisome, of course, is not conventional, but nuclear strike capabilities, which will be shown to you by the next page. Medium and intercontinental range ballistic missiles. China has given up nothing. It is building all kinds of arsenal, and it is in China. You see that they are increasing, not decreasing, the number of nuclear warheads. The next time Vladimir Putin and Joe Biden will be sitting together discussing what to be done about nuclear disarmament, discussion is going to be substantial without taking into consideration what the Chinese are doing on their nuclear arsenal development. Yesterday, on the 1st of July, the Chinese Communist Party celebrated its centenary. And 2049, 28 years down the road, will be another very much important year for the People's Republic of China, because it was in 1949 when the People's Republic of China was established by the declaration made by Chairman Mao, who stood on the gate of Tiananmen. It is likely, therefore, that China is going to build further capabilities on all kinds of fronts, from conventional to nuclear, cyber, to space, electromagnetic. This is an era of uncertainty. The Indians and the Japanese are neighbors, sharing the same neighbor that is zealous, eager, and committed to building further capabilities. And that's the reality, if you like it or not. The next slide, please. This is an important thought exercise, if you think about it. And you can create this map yourself very easily by going to a website called thetruesize.com. This is very much a handy way to kill your time if you have to. You go to thetruesize.com and you can handpick a country of your choice and put that country upon a place that you like. So what I did was to handpick China. The blue line represents China, and put it on the North American continent. You can now see what's the trick here. It is to avoid the confusion and misperception caused by Mercator projection. Mercator projection makes places like Greenland disproportionately large. But if you put China on North American continent, it would look this big, right? Not many Americans have come to terms with this comparison. Finally, and may I say, belatedly, people in the United States, especially those elite people involved in foreign and security policies in the United States, have come to be aware that the competition and confrontation to superpowers will stay for years to come, and will gain even more intensity and complexity. After all, if you look back at the Cold War era, although confrontation was very much severe, the competition was actually about being counting, was it not? Because it was about the number of intercontinental ballistic missiles and the number of nuclear warheads the ICBMs could carry. And it was about the number of attack submarines, nuclear powered. Although the competition and confrontation were very much serious, but it was simple by nature. Those that divide the United States and China at the moment are far, far more multifaceted. As I indicated, ranging from conventional nuclear warfighting capabilities to electromagnetic, cyber, deep space, AI, quantum computing, you name it. On all those fronts, there will be even confrontation between the United States and China. That much has been well understood by now by more and more policy planners of the United States. However, not many in the States have how large China would be if put on the North American continent. The next slide will give you even more pertinent picture, pertinent for me in Japan. So please show us the next slide. This is about Europe, right? If you put China on the continental European map, the country would look even bigger psychologically or mentally, because you would see under this scenario, in these circumstances, no Germany, no France, no Italy, no Poland, not even the richest part of Russia, not to mention Turkey, Ukraine, and so on and so forth. This is a mental map that the Japanese are looking at, because if you put yourself into the shoes of the British, you can see on the continental side, there would be only one. There would be only one country. If it's the case, the signature policy of British diplomacy of allying one and alienating another, coming closer to one country and making distance, that's what is called offshore balancing. It was even possible, it was possible only for the United Kingdom, because there were many countries on the continental side. That's not the case. That's not the case in East Asia. So this is another mental exercise, thought exercise you may want to do yourself. Remember, it's very easy. If you go to thetruesize.com, you can do these things very easily. So the next slide. This is about seascape. Japan is looking at not landscape, but seascape. You can see small red pins, one around Taiwan, another in the middle, and yet another far off. And as a footnote, this map is tilted 90 degrees anti-clockwise. Japanese archipelago, you can detect where it is. And the red pin close to a big island, which is Taiwan, represents what is called the group of Senkaku Islands. You must have heard that each passing day, Chinese official boats are provoking Japanese territorial integrity by sending boats every day to the that surrounds the Senkaku Islands. Why the Chinese are so much interested in provoking Japanese territorial integrity? Is it only to be disliked by people in Japan? No way. It is the Chinese leaders are doing this upon calculation of their own, because Taiwan is a trophy target that China has got to take back. And it was reiterated most articulate, in a most articulate manner by Xi Jinping when he addressed the audience commemorating the centenary of the Chinese Communist Party. What about the small red pin on the upper end? That is an island called Yap, spelled Y-A-P. And it is an island along what the Chinese call the second island chain. And it is the Chinese private, quote unquote, investors that have poured a huge amount of money into golf courses, hotel resorts, and the like on this not so big island of Yap. It's a set pattern. In the case of Chinese expansions, it is private, quote unquote, investors that go first abroad to a target nation and invest in many commercial activities, to be followed by political interventions from China to that target nation. And Yap Island bears strategic salience because it is right in the middle of Western Pacific Ocean, and that sits along the long stretched sea line of commerce that bridges China with South American countries. And these activities rang alarm bells to the Australians and to the New Zealanders. I have not mentioned what's going on in Fiji, where you have a huge number of Indian diasporas. It is the same. In Fiji, the Chinese are investing a huge amount of money in their commercial activities, and the port of Fiji has accommodated a number of times Chinese military boats and vessels. So that's what's happening in the Pacific Ocean. Let's just go to the next slide. Again, this is a globe atlas tilted 90 degrees anti-clockwise in order for you to see that there is a stretch of two seas the vast stretch of seascape. So this is the strategic area the Indians and the Japanese are now jointly looking at. And so it is about confluence of the two seas, the Pacific Ocean and the Indian Ocean. The next slide. Which brings us back to the concept of Quad. What is Quad? This is actually a conceptual picture I draw based on an article that Shinzo Abe contributed to Project Syndicate. Project Syndicate is a web-based op-ed pieces publication. There you see well-known scholars and policymakers contributing their thoughts and ideas to that website of Project Syndicate. Mr. Abe, Shinzo Abe, came back in office December 2012. Shortly after that, Project Syndicate ran Shinzo Abe's short piece, and that piece was entitled Asia's Democratic Security Diamond. He spelled out in an articulate way that the greatest challenge Japan and other democratic nations will continue to have to face is this great rise of China as a military power, economic power, and political power. Proposed by Shinzo Abe at the time was to connect 4 dots like this to make a diamond-shaped quad. Starting from the right-hand side, which is Hawaii Islands, a base for US Pacific Command. Down below, another dot is in Darwin, Australia. Now that's a great port that accommodates more and more Marine Corps, US Marine Corps members. And the Japanese self-defense forces have visited the port rather frequently. And of course you see Kolkata in India, and then Tokyo of Japan. Combining these 4 dots makes a shape not dissimilar to diamond, which is why Shinzo Abe dubbed that Asia's Democratic Security Diamond. The idea order. You get a great revisionist power in the name of China that challenges status quo. But status quo, if you look at that, has benefited almost all of us, including the Chinese. There is no point, in my view, China to change the status quo because the existing international order, from maritime to trade and to other governance structures benefits even China as well. But the truth be told, the reality is the Chinese are not content, and they are challenging the status quo on a regular daily basis, which propels those countries such as Japan, Australia, India, the United States to get closer to each other. Anyhow, Shinzo Abe wrote a piece as early as January 2013, and that was the direct beginning, genesis of the geopolitical framework that would later gain a name of Quad. The next slide, please. The next slide. I am going to speak about the genesis of another geographic concept of Indo-Pacific as opposed to Asia-Pacific. A brief historical overview. There was a prime minister in Japan whose name was Ohira, surname Ohira, given name Masayoshi. And he worked with then Australian Prime Minister John Malcolm Fraser. And they together launched APEC, which is an abbreviation for Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation. It takes place in a rotated way among member nations. India being not a member, not many of you have had in-depth knowledge about APEC, but that was launched in 1980. And it coincided with an era, a decade, where when you saw the growths of so-called four tigers, South Korea, Taiwan, Hong Kong, and Singapore. Then came the next century, our current century, 21st century, with the Chinese economy starting to grow phenomenally. And along with that, China left behind its long-cherished low-profile posture and started to become more and more aggressive on the international arena. The next page. Thank you. Then there was a visit in 2006 by Japanese Prime Minister Abe, Shinzo Abe, and he took office as Prime Minister and urged his counterpart, Manmohan Singh, who sometimes Shinzo Abe called his mentor. Manmohan Singh and Shinzo Abe talked about the concept of Quad briefly, but it did not actually take shape, reason that I will touch shortly. Mr. Abe came to India, and addressed the Central Hall audience of Indian Parliament, August 2007. The speech that he delivered was titled this way, Confluence of the Two Seas. As a footnote, the speech began by quoting Swami Vivekananda. Swami Vivekananda, needless to say, was a rising star in 1893 in Chicago in the World Assembly of Religions. He stressed again and again that all religions are equal. Not single religion is superior to any other. And all thoughts and spirits faith mingle together if they are streams in a vast sea. So that's the point Swami Vivekananda mentioned in his well-known address he gave to the Chicago audience back in 1893. But Swami Vivekananda spent 10 days prior to setting off for his cross-Pacific journey to reach North America. So he had a close encounter to Japan in 1893, and he did not forget what he saw and who he met in Japan. He repeatedly urged his followers to see at least one chance, opportunity to go see Japan through their eyes. He could have lived much, much longer. It's a pity that he did not make the second visit to Japan. Anyhow, confluence of the two seas was based on Swami Vivekananda's deep-rooted belief. However, the title itself was borrowed from another source. Darashiko is the name of a Mughal prince, and this prince published his own book under this exactly the same title, Confluence of the Two Seas. It is in that speech, for the first time in history, the Indo-Pacific as a strategic notion emerged. Narendra Modi and Shinzo Abe Shinzo, came particularly close. And I can assure you, no single leader in foreign countries was as close to Shinzo Abe as Narendra Modi. They were really soul mates. And then they together worked on beefing up the concept of Indo-Pacific and Quad. Thank you very much. The next slide. How and why India has earned salience in Japanese diplomacy. The next slide, please. Okay, we've got only a couple pages to go, so bear with me a bit more. The strategic alignment between the two nations dates back to the launching of the East Asia Summit, the first meeting of which took place in 2005. What is this East Asia Summit, or the EAS in short? It was created in 2005, and there was an important development prior to that year, 2005. 2001 was a year that was very much important for China for a couple of reasons that follow. November 2001, the United States was under attack by Islamist extreme group, Al-Qaeda. And the the war against terror was to be launched immediately. The United States wanted to have as more partners, even allies, as possible. So George W. Bush, then President of the United States, came closer to China and urged China to cooperate with the United States. So seen from the Chinese vantage point, the United States chose to show weakness to China, which for Chinese leaders should work to the benefit of China. So that's number one. Number two, by that year, with a great support and help from both the United States and Japan, China made entry into WTO. China had become a full-fledged member of the World Trade Organization. So that was a seal that the international community gave to China, a seal of recognition. So that's number two. Number three, in that year, China in Shanghai hosted the meetings of APEC, Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation, that I just mentioned. It was the first ever big multilateral meetings that China had ever hosted. Remember, by that time, China was very much multi-diplomacy shy. And China wanted to do everything on a bilateral framework, not multilaterally. But it showed that China, becoming greater still, earned a degree of confidence in hosting those multilateral meetings. And then, at the same time, the Chinese diplomacy made a superb surgical strike, if you like, against smaller neighboring nations, member nations of ASEAN, by proposing to ASEAN that these two entities, China and the ASEAN, ought to form an FTA, free trade agreement. And it was a stunning development for Japan. And it was also equally a stunning development for other nations, including Singapore. So Singapore and Japan joined forces and started to work to invite democratic countries to offset an increasing influence exerted upon ASEAN by China. Those democratic nations that India and Japan jointly worked on bringing in were, needless to say, India, Australia, New Zealand. Then started was this East Asia Summit. The other name that represents the same grouping is ASEAN plus 6. ASEAN being a group of 10 Southeast Asian nations. So 10 nations plus China, South Korea, Japan, and then you have India, Australia, New Zealand. Therefore, it is ASEAN plus 6. And then they chose to call that group EAS. The whole notion was, with India, Australia, New Zealand, we would be more democratic rather than Sino-centric. So India gained salience at that time as a partner nation for Japan to be able to rely more and more upon. And come to think about it, India is a full-fledged member nation in the Southeast Asian country, Southeast Asian region. Why? Well, it's so much obvious. Across the Bengali Bay, you get a group of islands, an archipelago called Andaman Nicobar. Those islands sit right off the strategic choke point of the Strait of Malacca, and that's off Myanmar, which makes India an integral part of Southeast Asian region. And that much more and more strategic planners in Tokyo as well. And India, of course, is a maritime democracy. And it should also go without saying, India is going to be the most powerful engine for growth for decades to come. It is not going to be China any longer. It is going to be China. It is going to be India. So those things combined, India started to gain more and more attention from those engaged in strategic planning in Tokyo. The next slide, please. What does Japan expect to gain from Quad and its future? This is the final chapter. It is not about economy, trade, investment. It is about geostrategy. It is about national security. That's the foundation. You may perhaps develop more and more upon that foundation in the future, but at the moment, the rock-solid foundation is that 4 countries have chosen to get closer together, to share strategies, to share their military awareness, which makes the first bullet point of close military jointness all the more important. And this importance is not going to change anytime soon. Second, I maintain that now is the time for 4 countries and their leaders to build a habit of speaking over all kinds of issues all the time among them. And that leads us to tackle many other fronts, starting from cooperation on future technologies, AI, cyber, and deep space explorations. Equally, intelligence sharing, why not? India, Japan, Australia, the United States could share and should share military, security, intelligence even more. Joint development of future defense technologies. Last point, India's traditional closeness to Russia. I think it should work not to the detriment, but to the benefit of India and other Quad member nations. Why? Because no other nation is as close to Russia as India is. And India is a proud country, proud of its democratic development, prouder still of its democratic path going forward. No one thinks that India would become a vassal nation of Russia. It's not going to happen. But you're not interested in cutting off your traditional ties, including military cooperations with Moscow. Let it continue. And you could take advantage of the knowledge and experiences that you have developed by being close to India in order for you to make a positive contributions to the maintenance of the rules-based order of the Indo-Pacific. I believe this is the final page. Am I right? Yes. So this is the end. I have spoken for about 55 minutes, 50 minutes, and so on. And I'd be very much happy to get engaged in lively questions, lively question and answer session. So I will stop here.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Tomohiko, for extremely illuminating presentations. Many of the things that we are not even aware of, particularly the kind of mental exercise you urge us to do. I think that's also quite essential to understand the etiology and evolution of what as such, because that addresses the question why what. Because very rightly and very beautifully explained the context, the backdrop in which the Quad as a distinct group, not necessarily a kind of formal alliance, began to emerge. And the second part of the lecture is equally interesting, where you try to underline the enduring salience of India in the foreign policy of Japan. And you did highlight India's geostrategic and geoeconomic significance. And you sound quite optimistic. I would not mind saying this again. I mean, I do subscribe to that. Inshallah, I hope it happens. Say, India is a powerful growth engine, likely to surpass China in the years ahead. I hope it happens. And finally, you also try to basically link the very concept of former Prime Minister Abe's Indo-Pacific and the confluence of seas, tracing the roots to some of these medieval scriptures or or 19th century Swami Vivekananda idea. That's a brilliant. It shows the kind of academic flair in the entire presentation that you made today. But I would like to add my comment to it. When this whole process started way back in 2005 onward, if it was delayed for 10 years, till the time the chemistry between former Prime Minister Japan and our charismatic Prime Minister Modi began to take shape. It was largely because the last government was largely domestically focused, more tied down with the domestic problems because the very collusion character of the government as such. And the second, many of our observer analysts, unfortunately, fell a victim to China's charm offense, because many of them actually began to believe that China would never pose the kind of threat we see today. In 2017, then in last year's June in Galwan, these are the real threat. Many of us simply did know about it, but some of the other, we decided to choose to ignore it peacefully. And what cost? But that's very important. That's the billion-dollar question. Many of us even today are trying to find an answer to it. Because you are today constrained to do a lot of things in such a short period of time. Look at the differential growth between India and China. It's extremely difficult. So even if you try to do something, so what pulls us down was the absence, the corresponding economic development. So that kind of gap could have been to an extent bridged had our policymakers taken note of it. What the former Prime Minister of Japan didn't. One needs that kind of foresight, achievement, to understand, to foresee the kind of threat emerging. After China is not an ordinary power, is a hegemonic power, right? You said, again, is a rogue hegemon. Is a hegemon maybe not comparable to the United States of America was in 1950. Or for that matter, the great colonial power, the United Kingdom. Or for the Netherlands in Southeast Asia, for that matter. So these are certain questions which till date I have found no convincing answer. Honestly, Professor, I can admit it before you. And I think I'm quite sure some of our younger scholars to have questions, to have queries. Even some of them also feel like giving their comments based on their understanding of the evolving situation today. So now the session is open for your comments and questions. I just request all of you, those who would like to pose question, first identify yourself, then briefly ask questions, or if you feel like give your comments. Yeah.
Good evening, sir. Can I ask the convener, Professor Prashant Sharma, to grant permission to post a question?
No, you have to ask. You have to seek my permission. I'm chairing. Is it
Okay. Thank you, sir.
So
I am
I
Dr. Shinzo on Biswas.
Yeah.
From Bidhan Chandra College, Department of History. Good evening, respected sir. Good evening, Sir Professor Tomohiko. My question is that despite the Quad, there are already BRICS, BIMSTEC, ASEAN. These organizations are already existing. And also, there are many bilateral alliances between the countries. So Quad is comparatively a new development, which RECON has developed after 2017. So despite the existence of the organizations, that's the BRICS, ASEAN, BIMSTEC, and other and as such, how this Quad is going to be effective in containing the aggressiveness of China as far as the South China Sea is concerned, as well as a danger sign for India in the Indian Ocean, especially the Andaman and Nicobar Islands. And how far this Quad will be effective in dealing with the regional economic cooperation as far as China is concerned. Thank you, sir.
Japan's economy is very much dependent on Chinese domestic market. American economy is the same. An American entrepreneur, the flamboyant manager, Elon Musk, his wealth derives very much from the auto market of China, where he sells a huge number of electronic driven cars. India's economy is going to be inseparable from China. So be it. Every one of us shares great economic stakes with China. And then we cannot get conquered and divided by China, each one by one. We must join hands together in order for us to show to China, listen, there are rules that you should pay respect to. There are norms that you should abide yourself. Who could say things like that? Frankly speaking, ASEAN has never said anything like that to China. Is Australia able to do so alone by itself? The country has been squeezed and coerced and bullied by China for the last 2-3 years. The value of Quad, may I say an added value to Quad, is the following. Number one, it has the United States, which is still the sole that administers the safety, peace, and order from the Indian Ocean to the Pacific. The second most important element about Quad, which is its added value, is the inclusion of India. May I stress that again and again. Quad is in a way an investment into the future of India. The Quad is all about the future, and It is to invest into ourselves with each other so that in the next decades to come, the growth of India and the still existing power of the United States, and as a burgeoning democratic economy, Japan, Australia, should continue to join forces together. So that's what the Quad is about for me. BRICS is another group, but I think that was a phenomenon that was launched in response to the semi-collapse of international financial and economic order that we saw in 2008. G20 was similarly developed, but see, BRICS, G20, would you say that either one of these has brought meaningful, anything fruitful? It is important for those leaders to gather on the sidelines of multilateral meetings such as G20. So I wouldn't say it bears no value, but BRICS and G20, if there is something in common among those nations, it is all about economy. It is nothing about value. It is nothing about international order. So that's something that I could say to your question.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Anybody else? Anybody else? Hello.
Sir, I don't think I don't see any questions. I think we should proceed further.
Okay. Proceed further in what way? If there are no questions, how will you proceed?
And that's true.
Just one more round. Let me ask him. Any of you have any questions or comment? Please. If not, then so we'll come to. Then we'll try to conclude the lecture, special lecture delivered by Professor Tomohiko, and this excellent analysis, and many of the points that he has highlighted are extremely important to understand the significance of Quad as such. And some of these statements that he has made may sound a little overly optimistic, or let's just say some of you may take it with a pinch of salt. Like if the kind of things he said is an investment on India's future. But it may be debatable among the Indian analysts if somebody says that it is investment in Indian future, because India's foreign policy is based on certain traditional practice. One of them is the so-called strategic autonomy. So sometimes this government of the day finds it difficult to forge consensus if there is a slight deviation from the established norms and practice, like strategic autonomy. Many people until recently used to talk about the non-aligned movement, better to remain neutral, non-aligned. These things in a different global context are increasingly outdated. There was a time when India preferred to take up the role of a typical union leader, all the time crying, clamoring, complaining, grieving. That period is over. But then the problem with us is we refuse to grow. We just simply refuse to get out of this kind of thing from this mental makeup. We think India is still 1960s, 70s. It is not. So that's a problem so far your mental makeup is concerned. The perception of each individual about the world is concerned. That's ontological aspect of it. But then second, amidst this kind of problem, it is really challenging for the foreign policy establishment to make a certain break or rupture with the established foreign policy practices. That's one. Fortunately, This government is relatively free from the internal constraint that that the earlier government faced before. Whether India asserting its neighborhood, whether India trying to become, adopting little proactive foreign policy. These things today is possible because the scope is very nature of the government. That's the ideology it represents, and it is the single largest party forming government, which was not there for last 10 years. These are certain advantages this government enjoys. So, result of which today this government in a position at least to join a Quad with certain conditionality that it is not a formal alliance, even if the critics keep harping on that it is an Indo-Pacific NATO, or it is the Asian variant of NATO. It is not. It may, even if it becomes. So what? So today, foreign policy of any country, including Japan, is today governed by purely neo-realistic imperatives. That is not simply concerned the physicality or the threat to your territorial sovereignty. Even it is something called ontological security. It is your identity, which is reflected in your unique culture, history, whether it is India or Japan. These are not artificially constructed states. So when somebody talks about only territorial sovereignty, that person has a very narrow focus so far the foreign policy objective is concerned. It also involves a country like India and Japan, which are to an extent even civilization state. That's something called identity, its own unique identity. So these are being threatened with the what I call the aggressive posturing on part of China. So this is a way faced with that kind of challenges. But at the same time, another challenge is the economic interdependence, as Professor Tomohiko rightly highlighted. This on the one level you have the economic interdependence. You have RCEP, where India is not a member, Japan happens to be a leading member. Despite all the casualty and the boxing done by the Japanese Prime Minister, the Indian Prime Ministers took a position saying no. So India has joined RCEP because we know where it ultimately leads towards. It is nothing but institutionalizing through economic interdependence, which is nothing but an asymmetric relation between economically and increasingly military powerful China on the one side and other member states. And the asymmetric relationship would ultimately benefit China, the most powerful, which is likely to control 60 trillion economy by 2030. We are still trying to approach 3 trillion. You look at the gap. Japan is far behind. It's likely to surpass, what I call America. And the neo-realist assert that a country which is economically powerful will never remain a status quo power. It will always try to expand its influence and translate its economic heft into strategic influence beyond the region, beyond its territorial confines. And finally, China today is, when outside looks to all of you as a communist state, it is not. It is an ultra-nationalist state. And 100 years by 2049, now this man called the chairman of Chinese Communist Party, Xi Jinping, is called Xism. The centerpiece of Xism is rejuvenation, the grand rejuvenation of China. What is that? That China would, its whole primacy would be restored to the center. All other countries, all other states would become a vassal states, would be subordinated to China. That is what the Chinese nationalism is all about. If you read their national textbook, which are reflective of that kind of spirit, where nationalism in a country like India is an anathema, today it constitutes the mainstay of the hegemonic ideology of China. That's what constitutes the source of legitimacy of China. That once upon China was at the center of the world, as it's called ideological Tianjia. And today, China is aspiring for that status, position at the center to become a great Asian power. Communism is simply an hogwash, is a cover-up. Underlying the so-called communism, the so-called egalitarian society, that the way we understand communism in India, because I'm from JNU, my university is known for all kind of communist ideology. It's completely different from what the Chinese Communist Party practices. So what I'm trying to tell you here, you have the ideological, vertical drive, and the other side, the economic power of China. According to pure realistic assessment, a country will definitely try hard the way Germany did it in the early part of 20th century. China will have that kind of ambition, aspiration to become to begin with a global power, Asian power, then gradually a global power, replace the United States of America. So that's quite reflected the way today Professor Tomohiko began his entire presentation with the map, reflecting the aspiration or the ambition of China, what it wants to become. So that's very important. He didn't say in so many words, but it's quite understood and reflected in the entire presentation. And that broader context of Chinese ambition, I think the word is essential to at least to an extent counter the Chinese influence, wherever it is trying hard to expand, whether it's Indo-Pacific or in any parts of the world, either through BRI project, Asia. These are the things which need to be taken into account when you try to examine the efficacy or the effectiveness of the very concept of what as such. Thank you very much, sir, Professor, for having spared your time. And it is personally, I benefited a lot from your presentation for extremely enlightening lecture. And I think I'm also extremely grateful to the host here from Calcutta University for inviting such a great scholar, a really erudite scholar, a foreign policy practitioner, to share his experience, share his ideas with all of us. Thank you very much. Thank you to the host as well, Prashant. Over to Prashant.
Thank you very much, sir. May I now invite our final semester student, Miss Ankita Singh, to deliver a formal vote of thanks. Ankita, are you there?
Yes, I am there. Thank you, sir. It is my privilege to have been asked to propose a vote of thanks to all who have helped us in making this one-day international webinar such a resounding success. At the very outset, we would like to extend our profound thanks and gratitude to our Vice Principal, Sir, Dr. Ramesh Kar, the permission and providing his perennial support and encouragement towards the successful conduct of this webinar. We express our heartiest thanks to Professor Aswini K. Mohapatra, Sir, Dean at the School of International Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi, for agreeing to chair this webinar entitled Decoding the Quad Past, Present and Future. Despite his both tight administrative and academic engagements, sir, our encouraging participation as a chair has stimulated this occasion into a thought-provoking and vibrant academic event. Thank you so much, sir. We extend our heartiest thanks to our distinguished speaker, Professor Tomohiko Taniguchi, Special Advisor to former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, Japan, for accepting our invitation despite his busy schedule. Sir, we also thank you not only for sparing your precious time with us, with our widespread expertise and first-hand experiences about dealing with the assorted aspects of the quadrilateral security dialogue. We are eagerly looking forward to have many more opportunities to hear your captivating thoughts and ideas. Thank you so much, sir. Now, we would like to thank to the President of the governing body of our college, Dr. Sudipta Roy, sir, and all the members of the governing body for their constant moral support to our webinar. We would also like to thank Dr. Abdul Khan Khalik, sir, as an assistant professor at the Department of Physics, and Professor Deptanu Maji, sir, and Assistant Professor of Department of Political Science for performing their responsibilities as technical advisor. Our vote of thanks also go to Professor Kamal Roy sir and Professor Anandita Mitra ma'am, both at the Department of Political Science, for their constant support in organizing this webinar. We extend our hearted professors of all the departments and all the non-teaching staffs of our college for their moral support. A special thanks goes to all the students of the Department of Political Science for enthusiastically coordinating and supporting the webinar by showing fervor interest from the very beginning. Last but not the least, our sincere thanks go to all the respected participants present here for their active participation and for making this event a huge success. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you. Prashant, please make a formal announcement. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much, Ankita, for delivering a formal vote of thanks. I also acknowledge the perennial support and encouragement provided by our head of the department, Professor Devdas. Sir, his encouragement and constant guiding has helped us to organize such webinars. I also acknowledge the efforts of coordinator Ms. Jamima Parveen and F. Suresh Murthy in organizing this webinar. I once again thank you all for your active participation in this webinar. We are hoping to see you all again. Have a wonderful time ahead. Good night to all of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me.
Sir.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Have a nice day.
You too. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Bye-bye now.